except the last one on the speed bump. It's kind of putting me out of business. So, let's hope some balance in those things remain. And I think there are ways to actually do speed bumps which are good, but I think that one is a bit extreme. I'd love to discuss it afterwards. So I would like to focus on two topics, both related to geometry and to the impact of geometry on latency or latency on geometry. The first one addresses how costs scale in the industry and where should we stop. And of course, I don't have an answer, but I can describe to you a simple model with which we can discuss this. Now, let me tell you first a little bit about us, because this is like the State of the Union address. Every year we come and we say we've done this and that. And this year we've done a lot. We have delivered Europe. We have the fastest commercial line in Europe, so we're not just a one-trick pony, not just the US. We are the fastest in Frankfurt and 3 data centers in London. We've opened local links in London, and we're finishing them presumably by the end of June. There's always a little bit of uncertainty in those dates. And we've also added many data sources and some data centers in the US. Our next step, obviously, is more geographical expansion, probably in a different continent, and many more data sources. But let me turn to the first topic. Suppose you have a simple problem. You have 4 dots and you need to connect them. And the 4 dots you can guess, like the one on the left is the CME, and the 3 on the right are the 3 data centers, Mahwah, NY4, and Carteret in New Jersey. So you can do that, and you want to do that in the most efficient way. So what does that mean, most efficient? You have to define this. So most efficient can mean the cheapest possible way, and that's the first simple solution. Or it can mean in the absolute fastest way between the CME and any of the data centers in New Jersey, and that's the other trivial solution. Now, of course, life is not that simple, and what you want to do is something in between. So what you want to do is you really want to solve this problem. That's very simple math. You write the distance from the CME to each of them, and you say, you plot the distance against the cost that you have to do that. And really the way I want to do it is I want to do it for the example of CME to New Jersey, and I want to assume a price for a new tower, and I will take a number which is not the right number. The right number is full of details, but let me pick $100,000 a year per tower, and let me say that we have a tower every 50 kilometers. And please excuse my being metric. It's just simple. Simpler for me. I just can't handle miles. I have this thing with Bob, and Bob always plots things in miles, and I can't stand it. It's so difficult when you're a partnership and like one guy is in miles and the other guy's in kilometers. It's really tough. Just a little hint about marriage. All right, so let's look at this. So this is the problem solved. The parameters I chose is 3 data centers in New Jersey, 25 kilometers apart, and 1,200 kilometers away from Chicago. So on the left of that screen, I don't know if you can see it well, on the left of the screen is the fully latency optimized solution. And on the right of the screen is the absolute cheapest solution, which is just one split before the last data center. So what I am plotting here is in blue in direction, and that's in kilometers, and you read that on the right axis. The left axis is dollars. The right axis is common to all the other curves, and the right axis is on a log scale. And you can see that if you start from the right, so the far right of the screen, you can see that the indirection gains are higher. So as you add a tower, you gain a lot of indirection. And at the very left of the blue curve, the indirection that you gain is very, very minimal. I think the last one buys you 70 meters. So it's really not a ton. It's very small. So obviously, since the cost of putting up a tower is a fixed cost, if you buy just 70 meters, the cost of the microsecond that you buy, or in this case it would be nanoseconds, is very high. So the cost of a microsecond, which is the blue line and which you can read on the left, escalates a lot as you go down to the most latency optimized solution. So the most latency optimized solution, the last towers that you put in cost you about 2.8 million a year per microsecond. And that's not the exact number. Real life is different. You think you can build the towers at a fixed cost, but then you fail and you have to go back and you have to change the equipment. So probably for the first builds, this is a big underestimation. As we grow better about doing this, this may converge to a more reasonable estimation of the real cost. And I have randomly chosen a 5-year amortization period for that. So we can do that for 3 data centers, but some people don't trade equities, some people trade bonds. And if you do that, the same calculation for bonds, you have exactly the same curves, but the numbers are different because the data centers, eSpeed and BrokerTec look closer together. So adding more towers is even more costly at the end. So there, the last microsecond will cost you, what was it, about 9 million a year. And that's an underestimation. So the question is, what did we do? We were faced with that choice and we chose to split somewhere. And if I plot where we split on the graph, this is where we split. So we split at a place, and if you look at the blue line, we split at a place where the cost per microsecond hasn't escalated completely yet. So it's still a reasonable place. My fear is that we'll have to go left. We'll be driven to go left. So that's a little bit of an issue, but the industry faces it, and that's competition. You can't really disallow people to compete because you think the greater good would be better served if they don't. Actually, the greater good probably wouldn't not be better served. All right, so what about looking at this on a map? I've told you about this as a toy problem. What does it look like in real? What is the real picture? So this is it. And actually, the place where we split is really there under that little red star. And that's the solution that we came up with. It looked reasonable. I'm not pretending that we did the whole calculation before we did that. We did it more on instinct, and it looks like we landed on a reasonable solution. Now, as you all know, every year we have quizzes and prizes. So here comes my first question. What is the name of the village next to the red star? It's a very tough question. It's a very, very tough question. Not a lot of people know that intimately that little part of Pennsylvania. So I didn't know the answer to that question, but it popped up under my eyes. I was preparing the graph, and actually, it's McKeeville. So this is an incredible coincidence. We did not plan for this, I promise. But, maybe we can say we did. And we would appear like geniuses, maybe. Unfortunately, we can't stop at McKeeville. We probably have to go a little further west. All right, so that really is the end of the first part. And here I'd love to pause and ask for questions.
Anyone have any questions? For Stéphane?
Nobody wants to know where it ends? Oh, well, I would know. I would love to know. All right, so let me turn to the second part of the talk. So that's something different. It's something about looking at news announcements and seeing what we can infer from them. So news is something that's very simple to look at because there's one release somewhere, or maybe many places, it depends, but some have one release somewhere. And then based on that release, the data is propagated, and then it's propagated to many exchanges, and it's acted upon. So what are the conditions to actually see the impact, and what can you infer from this? So the conditions are, first, you need to have a data release that was a surprise. Because when it's a surprise, then people want to go and trade in the market. They change their minds. They think S&P is not worth what it was before, and they trade. And they go and they rush to do that. So I am going to discuss one particular release, which is the employment report of February 6th of this year, and we're going to see what it did. So how do I look for it? So I look at different markets, and I look at the trades. So if you look at eSpeed, for instance, just before the announcement, there were very few trades. And there is one particularly big one, and it's very spotty, but it's a very clear signal. Like there's something happening on this line here. But that's only bonds. So it was less, it's not as big as a signal. But that's 1,305.798 millisecond after, when was it? 1330 GMT. So if you look at NASDAQ and you look at other securities, in there, the volume on the left is on a log scale because you wouldn't see anything otherwise. There's a big volume bump, a very big one. And that's about 2 microseconds before. So, on NASDAQ, you can see different securities, eSpeed, and on the equity exchange, and you can see that the signal is about 2 microseconds apart. That gives you an idea of the order of magnitude of the uncertainty that you have. And that's the matching engine, timestamp. So really, the news arrived a little before the time that it takes from an algorithm on a computer to send an order to the market, go through the gateway, and reach the matching engine. But there's very little slack. So within 10 mics, definitely, that the news arrived there at this particular time. Let's look at the CME. So the CME the response is huge on the CME on that day. And there again, you can see the volume on the log scale on the left. And there's a very clear and very well-defined time for that too. And the CME has microsecond timestamping too, so you can actually see, and then you have another time which is accurate to about, the matching engine time is 1 microsecond, but then there's also the jitter of reaching the matching engine, which you cannot really look at from this, but it's not very big. So it's less than 30 microseconds probably. Now let's look at ICE. So ICE had a much smaller response on that day, and ICE does not publish microsecond timestamping. So with a bit of work, you can go and infer within the millisecond exactly where it left. But just for the purpose of that discussion, we don't need to do that. But you can see the trace on ICE too. Now, this is for the US. but the world is becoming more and more globalized, and this has impact in Europe too. So if you go ICE live in the UK, it's still not time-stamped to the microsecond, but you can see the impact of the news too. And then, you go a little further, you go to Eurex, and on Eurex, it's time-stamped to the microsecond. You see the impact of the news. There again, it's clear, and the message is the world is definitely synchronized. So now that we have all those timestamps, what can we do with it? So, let me just show you the numbers. And one thing that you can do is you can say, okay, so it reached NASDAQ first. Let me express the numbers in terms of difference of time to arrival time at NASDAQ. And then you go back to your memory of school days, and you think about with the curve, which is the locus of point X, where AX minus BX is a constant. And I expressed the constant in kilometers because I assumed that the signal would travel from where it came from to NASDAQ and to CME approximately at the speed of light. And we'll revisit to see if that assumption makes sense. So that's my second question in the quiz. And by the way, you don't have to win to come by and say hello. We'll take losers too, no problem. Just come by, and I don't expect a ton of people to actually win. So we'll have a raffle. Give us your business cards, we'll draw, and we have prizes, one of which is a beautiful I Love McKeeville t-shirt. All right, so now, what is this curve? Anybody remembers high school geometry? Come on. Please help. I will go and point to someone if someone doesn't say. All right, you laugh. Fair goal? No? All right, okay. So no winners, everyone's eligible for the raffle. It's a hyperbola. So the A and B are the foci, and that curve itself is a hyperbola. So when you know this, you can actually say, okay, I have the foci, I have the difference between that's 742 kilometers. So I can go and actually I can draw that on an actual map. I know where NASDAQ is, I know where CME is, and I can draw this. So I do that. So here, the dotted line on the right of the screen is the locus of all the points from which the news can be released, from which it's consistent, a news release is consistent. So I'm expecting someone to get that one right. Like, which is your best guess for which point on that hyperbola it is? It's not a hard question, that one. Washington, D.C., absolutely. So actually you draw it, and I didn't cook the numbers one bit. So this is exactly that. You can see that it came from Washington, D.C. And actually, if you had like more data centers spaced apart a little differently, you could actually draw a different hyperbola with two different points, two different foci, and they should intersect in DC. So, and that's the way the GPS actually works. Just so you know. That wasn't a question. All right, so now that we know that it came from DC, and actually, it's documented to come from DC, so we can trust these guys. So it actually comes from K Street. So we can infer exactly the release time now that we know this. So the actual release time, and obviously there's some error bar. I haven't done the full scientific analysis of this, so I didn't put the error bars so that it's not completely scientific. when I write it up, if I have the time to, I will put the actual error bars. Now that you have the actual release time, you presumably know which news agency won, and you also know what is the time of propagation from DC to all the data centers where you see the signature of that trade. So you do that, and you can see that it's consistent with speed of light propagation to the CME. It's consistent with speed of light propagation to NASDAQ, but it's obviously not consistent with speed of light perfect propagation to ICE UK or Eurex, because the actual distance on the map is much smaller than the distance inferred by the latency difference multiplied by the speed of light. What can you infer from this? Any answer is good. Like, there are tons of them. Exactly. So I will phrase it differently. Microwave dishes don't float, or not today, not yet. Actually, can you really infer this? I don't think you can actually say this. Because what we see here is not the speed of propagation. What we see here is the upper bound of the speed of propagation. We don't see the speed of propagation. We really know that the event was released at some time, and then we know that it was acted upon at some other time. But someone could have propagated the thing and looked at it and computed something, ran a model, and then traded on it. So you don't really see the speed of light propagation, or you cannot prove that this was not propagated at the speed of light, rather. You just see an upper bound. So given that this is what you can logically infer, what can we say about what you would have done with the best commercially available service, the Quincy data service or the McKay service? What would you have done? So first thing, it's not available between DC and Cartwright, because we don't have this bit. We're afraid of playing in the news game. But from Cartwright to Europe, we have lines. So you can go to our website, and you can see the latency between DC and Cartwright from this study, and you can see on our website where the latency is from Cartwright to Eurex. So on our website, we're very precise. I'm not sure it makes sense to be precise to the single microsecond, but we list 33.338 as the latency between Cartwright and Eurex on our service. And if you add this with the propagation from DC to Cartwright, you come up with 34.338. So that's approximately 390 seconds over the upper bound. So someone's much faster than us. All right, so next question. You have to wake up. So how can we explain the difference? And there's not just one answer to that. No idea? So they could be private microwave systems to transatlantic, and that's completely a possibility. You could have boats which you station and you shoot across. I think we would have heard about it because someone sails between the two continents and sees that range of boats with antennas and things. Something I'd like to talk about. So I'm not sure that is the answer, but it's a possibility. Well, there is also slack. We're not optimal. So amongst the possibilities is, you could go straight to Brookhaven where the best cable goes from DC. And From this, you can probably shave, I would say, 50 microseconds. I wrote less than 100 because I wanted to be very cautious. It's probably, less or equal to 50 microseconds. So you could also say, okay, from the cable in England to Frankfurt, instead of going through LD4, which is what we do, you go direct. And if you want to do that bypass, that probably buys you almost 100 microseconds, a little less than that. Then we are using, to cross the transatlantic, we're using someone else's network who we ride on to provide Quincy data. And we don't have exactly the internal latency of that provider. So there's a little bit of a speed bump or a latency difference. I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm pretty sure it's less than 100 microsecond to Frankfurt. So, there's some degree of uncertainty there. But, I list it as less than 100 microsecond. Then I haven't done all the careful analysis, so let me throw in 100 microsecond of uncertainty. So there is a remote chance, that this can be explained by, better, known ways of propagating the data. But there's also a pretty high likelihood that it's explained by something else, a different way of propagating data. Any guesses? Wow. So, like it could be balloons. Like I would have expected the balloon gas. It's one that's been floated around for a while. You could have the HF radio gas, So one of those. My intuition is that one of those things is actually in place today. Now the big question is, like, if you go procure, the next best cable transatlantic, is it going to beat this? Because remember, we only have an upper bound on the time it takes to go from DC to K Street. We don't have the real time. So I was discussing this with the Hibernia team yesterday, and I was like, we don't know. It's hard to know. Maybe there's something out there that's even faster than what you will build and open in a few months. So that's that. That was the talk. Please remember, that was a cautionary note that it's not always easy to do that, because sometimes there are much bigger news releases, such as Good Friday, and Good Friday was not open in Europe, so that kind of kills that bit of the analysis. But also, Good Friday was so big that the matching engine on the CME got delayed. And the response, you can't really pin down exactly when the response came. All right, let me close on a note saying that we're here to provide, analysis, the most cost-efficient service that we can, and to enable everyone to trade on the fastest that we can provide data, and to tell you when we believe we're not the fastest. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stéphane. We appreciate it. And I would encourage everyone to stick around. We got a really high-powered session coming up on next-generation infrastructure. So stick around, and we'll just for a minute as we get set up here on the stage. But thank you again, Stéphane.